If you've been at all active within the Geometry Dash community as of late, then no doubt you have been witness to some form of controversy. In fact, over the last couple of years, there have been quite a few controversies, many of which have led formerly popular figures to lose their standing within and trust from the community. One type of controversy that has been prominent really since the game's beginnings in 2013 are those related to cheating, probably the most relevant example being the exposal of former top player Space UK for faking level completions relatively recent in the game's history. However, while these sorts of scandals are obviously damaging to the community as a whole, for my purposes here, I'm focusing on a different kind of controversy. Somewhat surprisingly, Geometry Dash's most relevant controversies are not really centered on the game at all. Instead, they center around the community's social discourse and how leading members of the community treat others. Within my time in the community, I've witnessed content creators face public exposure for reasons like pedophilia, transphobia, homophobia, and racism. Many, if not all of these cases, involve some form of textual evidence in which the accused person was seen saying something that alienated, invalidated, or otherwise harmed a group or individual in an adverse way. In her acceptance of the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1993, writer Toni Morrison reflected on the possible consequences of language, stating that oppressive language does more than represent violence, it is violence. 30 years later, Morrison's words are perhaps more relevant than ever, and even more so with the advent of the internet. To Morrison's point, language is a powerful tool, and when used in a way that harms others, the effect can be massive. Although this may not have been what she had in mind 3 decades ago, this concept is essential to the issues facing the GD community. When community leaders make comments or act with hateful sentiment, it serves as a form of violence against both the GD community and people in general. To return to my earlier question, why is this a problem in a video gaming community? To help us consider this, let's take a look at the ethnographer Michael Agar. In his book Language Shock, Agar discusses the idea of frames, which are effectively societal expectations on how a social interaction should go. In other words, frames are the things that dictate how we act in certain situations with certain people. One frame that we face quite often in everyday situations is that of respect for others. Simply put, when talking or interacting with others, you should do so with respect for the other person and their identity. To do so validates who they are as a person and ultimately makes their day and yours better. However, as you might know if you've watched my video on GD's daily chat, these frames aren't always as strong in digital settings, and as a result, people may act much differently than they would in a physical setting. Here, it's useful to think about the concept of code switching, as discussed by Dr. Janet McIntosh. Code switching is when one changes how they speak or act based on the situation or environment they're in, and the people they're interacting with. In a physical setting in which they are familiar with the people around them, one might feel compelled to act in a positive way towards others due to frames or societal expectation. However, when going from a physical setting to a digital one might not feel as bound by social frames from the physical setting, and therefore may code switch in the way they act and speak. They may go from being respectful in a physical setting to being disrespectful in a digital one, a code switch that produces the possibility for hate and harmful behavior. When combined with a setting in which chats can be saved and screenshots taken, this code switching and weakness of frame creates an effective database of hate. This can lead to exposals such as the ones made within the GD community in the last couple of years, although I'll note that it certainly isn't a phenomenon isolated to the Geometry Dash community. That being said, it does seem to happen a lot for us. So why do we have so much trouble with controversy? Is there just something wrong with Geometry Dash players? Well, no, and actually, I would argue that the opposite is true. As I mentioned, this isn't only a GD problem. The internet's problem with hateful speech is all over, from video games to social media to countless other platforms. But what these controversies mean for our community is not that we have an exceptional amount of hate in our community, but instead that we are willing to stand up against it. Many people, and perhaps understandably so, tend to see drama and controversy as a negative. It may scare people away from the community, and perhaps it doesn't create the best image as a whole. But really, these controversies are the result of our community being willing to hold itself accountable, and to stand up for an accepting and safe community. What we've seen in the last few years have been examples of racism, homophobia, transphobia, pedophilia, and other kinds of harmful behavior. The only reason why we are seeing them in the first place is because a member of our community decided to speak up for the benefit of their fellow players. What I'm trying to say is, while these events are upsetting for what they are also important examples of the overwhelming good in the Geometry Dash community. When players come together to make sure that everyone has the right to be safe and comfortable in their time here. So, what can you do? Well, first of all, be conscious of what you say. As Morrison said, language is a powerful tool, and it lies in your hands whether you use it as a force for good or harm. By thinking about the possible effects of what you say on others, you can make the community a better place for everyone. And secondly, don't be afraid to speak up. It can be difficult, and understandably so, to talk about many of these issues and our experiences with them. But by having discussion as a community, we can prevent further harm and work to make our community better. Thank you all for making this community what it is, and continue being good to others. You are the reason I'm proud to be a member of the GD community.